Carol Wells is a co-founder of Wells Mountain Initiative. She and her husband, Tom Wells, started this in 2005. Her past role within WMI is Director of Operations, and her current role now, Board Secretary and Director of Special Projects, such as our online auction, which is coming up, where we help raise funds for the scholarships, and other projects Carol has her hands on directly. Her educational background is extensive. She has a BA in Psychology and Art from Bucknell University, located here in the US in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. And then she received her master's degree in Counseling and Human Services from John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio. After that, she has been involved in many types of businesses and organizations. She was in retail management with national chains, and she owned and operated with Tom a women's clothing store. She also utilized her master's degree working with social service agencies in assisting families and teens. She also served as a school social worker in many school districts for behaviorally challenged teens. She owned and operated and managed a bookstore and was the co-owner and manager, the current owner and manager of 5 local commercial properties. She's the executive director of an economic development nonprofit and has served on the town council in Bristol, Vermont for 6 years. She has a lot more experience, but that is the summary of most of it. And she has 40 years of hiring experience. So she's quite knowledgeable and is a great resource for you today. So without further introduction, I turn you over to Carol, where she will give you her presentation, and you'll have a chance to ask her questions later on. Thank you.
Okay, hello scholars. It's nice, I wanted to say nice to see you, but I can't see you, but I know you're there. So welcome to this webinar, and I hope you find it useful. I have been interviewing for many years, and I've interviewed people in many different fields, retail sales, retail management, administrative positions. Actually, everybody who currently works for WMI, I did interview, except for Johnson, who Jordan interviewed. I've also interviewed police officers and administrators for our town in Vermont, 4 managers of an art gallery, and executive directors for a few nonprofits. So even though I've interviewed candidates across different business positions, there's still basics in an interview process that are consistent in all. So you've been looking for a job and have found a job posting that you're interested in applying for. But before you apply, you need to do some research. Why would you research before you apply? Well, there's many reasons. You may find that the company is not a good fit for you. So why go through all the trouble of applying, setting up an interview, even going to the interview to discover that this really isn't a place you want to work? So you don't want to waste your time, and you don't want to waste the company's time. Researching will help you tailor your resume, your cover letter, your questions to ask the interviewer, and even your outfit that you wear to the interview. Not all applicants will take the time to do the research, and this will help you stand out in the interview process because it'll be obvious that you did some research during the interview. The interviewer will expect you to be interested and curious and to have some questions to ask the interviewer. So if you do research, you'll have better questions and they'll be able to tell that you're more knowledgeable. Okay, so how do you research? Several different ways. First, you browse the company's social media presence. Check their Facebook, their Instagram, and Twitter pages. This will give you an idea how the company wants to be viewed by consumers and the public. Check out LinkedIn to see if you have any connections or know any people who already work there. If you do, contact them for info and insights. Visit the company's website. What is their mission statement? What is their history? What products and services do they provide? Read the About Us section. Check the news articles they post. This will give you valuable insight into the culture of the company. Search Google and Google News for the company name. This will give you articles that they may not have posted on their website, and it'll give you more information about the company and what's been happening with them. Also, look up the company in Glassdoor. Glassdoor is a website where current and former employees can anonymously review the company. It also allows users to anonymously submit and view salaries. So this could be a really good source of information. Contact your connections, people you know who work there. Your university's career office may have a list of alumni who work at this company, and you can contact them for information and insight. Review the whole industry and the company's main competitors. What are the main challenges and trends in this industry? How is this company meeting those challenges? During the research, look for skills and experience that the company values. What type of people do they have? What type of people do they have as managers? Who are the key players in the company? Know a little bit about them. Look them up on LinkedIn. Look for news and recent events about the employer. Discover what the company's mission, values, and culture are. Who are the company's clients, and what services do they provide? Find out who will interview you and look them up on the company's website, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Do you have any common interests? If so, work it into your resume and interview. Now you've done the research. What do you do with the research, the results? Do you want the job? Do you still want to continue and try to get an interview? So how do you get an interview? For each position that I interviewed people for, there were many, many resumes to sort through. I'd say the most I had to sort through were 200, and probably the fewest about 10. So what makes it stand apart? What makes an application stand out? First thing you always want to send a cover letter. If you don't, that's a missed opportunity. Because in a cover letter, I understand you've had sessions on cover letters, so I won't go over what a cover letter should contain, but it is an opportunity to highlight some of your better, stronger characteristics, and you can also work into the cover letter some of the results of your research to let them know you're aware of what the company produces and that you've done found some extra information. Make sure you proofread your cover letter. Proofread it, have other people proofread it, not only your cover letter, but your resume as well. If you have mistakes, if you have misspellings, something sloppy, you're probably going to have your resume thrown in the waste can and you won't get an interview. If the person who's doing the interview, the company, has many, many applications coming in, they're looking for ways to narrow down the pool to interview. So you want to have your cover letter and your resume in perfect condition. You don't want to end up in the waste can. So you want to point out your qualifications that align with the skills they are looking for. Yes, it duplicates what you have in your resume, but it's important to highlight them again. If you incorporate knowledge of the company in your cover letter, that will catch their eye and set you apart, and it will increase the probability of you getting an interview. You also want to tailor your resume. You might want to leave out some old experiences or jobs that are not relevant to the current position you're applying for. During the research, you may have discovered a common interest or a connection with a school or an organization. So you want to be sure to add that to the resume under the interest section for this particular company. All right, so you've been successful. You now have an interview. Yay. Okay, now what do you do with the interview? You prepare. And here's more research. You want to figure out what to wear ahead of time and plan your outfit. This may sound kind of silly, but it's important. When you research the company, you should have noticed the culture. Was it a casual culture, very conservative? Was it kind of funky? I've had applicants show up in short shorts and a t-shirt, all the way to a semi-formal fancy dress, both wildly inappropriate, and neither one of them got the job. So you want to be tasteful and try to align what you wear with the company and plan ahead. You don't want to be there the morning of your interview wildly trying to figure out what you should wear. Also research, know where you're going. Check the address. Call and ask for directions. What building, what floor, what office. You may even want to make a practice run the day before to be sure you know where to go. Plan to arrive 30 minutes early. You don't want to start out an interview by arriving 10 minutes late because there was road construction or a change in the public transportation schedule. Nothing is worse than making an interview wait. You start off behind and on the wrong foot. Practice answering common interview questions. You can research these online. Some common ones are, what makes you perfect for this job? What skills can you bring to our company? Where would you like to be in 5 years, in 10 years? Why did you apply for this job? So there are a lot of different basic interview questions, but if you can have good solid answers to a few of these, your interview will go much smoother. Practice being interviewed by a friend or a family member. This will make you more relaxed and less stressed and exude more confidence. Again, research, know who you will be interviewing with. Obtain their contact information before the interview so you can email them a prompt thank you after the interview. I'm not impressed if I receive a thank you 1 week later. Often the decision of whom to hire has already been made. I am impressed if I receive a thank you email before the end of the business on the day of the interview. It shows me that that person I interviewed is on top of it and they know interview etiquette. As an interviewer, what does it tell me about our applicant, an applicant who has clearly done some research on the company, on me, and on the job? It tells me that they're serious and thorough. They are very interested in the job and my company. They show initiative and perseverance. They know how to do research, and they are curious and motivated to learn. In summary, seek a job that is a good fit for you. Research the job, the company, the employees, mission, and values. Prepare an effective cover letter, resume, interview questions and strategy, attire, and transportation to the interview. Enjoy the interview. It's an opportunity to toot your own horn and practice what you've learned and research. Follow up, send a thank you to the interviewer, and good luck with your first interview. That's all I have.
Thank you, Carol. That was wonderful and really informative. So now you have an opportunity, scholars, to pick Carol's brain a little bit with more questions if you have any. So as Nicole put in the chat, please use the Q&A feature to ask further questions, get more clarification, make some comments, and Nicole and I will take a look at that and read them to Carol for her to answer.
So I have a question, Carol. I'll kick us off here. Say I did do my research as best as I could, but then I show up at the interview and they tell me, oh, today you're actually going to meet with another person. They changed who I would meet with. Should I feel nervous, or can I still feel confident going into that interview now that last minute there's been a change?
Well, that can happen, and that's a good question. This is where the research that you've done on the company and the mission and the values and what the company actually does will pay off, because that won't change with whoever you interview with. It may mean you won't be able to tie something, share a common interest that you had with the person you were going to interview, but you can still rely on the other information that you found out during your research.
Good.
And knowing ahead of time that that might be a possibility, then you won't be thrown by it.
Okay, that's great. We have a question from one of our attendees. Sushan he says, hello, namaste, good evening from Nepal. What was the name of the website where there is a review of the company and salary? He wasn't able to hear that clearly.
Glassdoor, 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 yeah. Hi, Sujan.
Another question that I have is, I left the house early and I was prepared to arrive early, but I ended up getting to the interview late. How can I express this to the person who's going to interview me? Because you said I'm already starting the interview off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's why you should, maybe even a half hour isn't enough time. It's, you have a higher bar when you start out late. I mean, you can explain why you're late, but it comes across as kind of a weak excuse. So you're just going to have to dazzle them more than normal with your knowledge, your skills, your attitude, your motivation, so that halfway through the interview, they've totally forgotten that you were late. So you have to work a lot harder if you're late, but it's not impossible.
But basically, you should try to leave as early as possible. Give yourself more time than you think you might need, even more time.
Right. And that's why it's a good idea to even call and just talk to a secretary and find out exactly where, because sometimes you have a street address and you go and there's this big building and it's like, oh my gosh, now where do I go? What floor? You can waste time trying to figure that out. So just try to get as much information ahead of time of where exactly you're supposed to end up.
Okay. So we have another question here from David, and the question is, while doing your research, how can an interviewee frame a response to the salary question. And just to share with all of our scholars who are on this call, we are actually going to have a panel discussion, a live webinar with professionals from different sectors, and we are going to be asking that they discuss this very question later on in the course. So while Carol can take this question now, we are also going to spend, considerable time, and we also have some articles for you to read related to this specific question because it's a very good question.
It is a good question. It's not an easy one to answer. And I knew you were having another session on it, so I didn't go into that. But I remember one time I asked a person, what is your salary requirements? And the response was, I still remember it, so the person did get hired, by the way, but they had a lot of skills. It wasn't just because of this answer. But he said, I'd like to be paid enough so that I know you value me and my contribution to the company. So it's kind of like putting it back on, so if I offered him too low a salary, it would be insulting, so basically is what he was saying. But yeah, that's like a whole nother workshop. But you should have an answer. Don't go, oh, gee, I don't know. Make sure you do have a good answer. It can be based on what you were making before, what you really need to make, but have an answer. And this workshop that's coming up will give you tips on how to come up with an answer or a range. Doesn't have to be a specific, but to have an answer to that question.
Great. Oh, we have another one from Sanel Sibanda. She said, firstly, I want to thank Ma'am Carol for the amazing presentation. I'm glad to meet her for the first time. Then she says, since most interviews are now conducted virtually, what tips would you give to someone who will be attending such an interview for the first time? I will be having one sometime in November, and I am very nervous.
Okay, well, that is true. Now they've gone all virtual, the interviews. A lot of the basics are still the same. You still do your research. You want to try to find a nice quiet room, simple background that's not distracting. And everything else is the same. Make sure that you know how to get onto the Zoom connection so you don't show up late. The principles are the same, just a little different format, but you still want to do the research. You still want to have your questions. Even from your waist up, make sure you're dressed appropriately. I'm not going to see from the waist down. So the basics stay the same. It's just a little more challenging because you can't shake hands. It's hard to look right, eye to eye. That is one thing I forgot to mention. If you do an interview in person, you want to look directly at the person, look them in the eye when you're speaking to them. Nothing is more disconcerting than you're talking to somebody and they're looking at the floor. So eye contact is important, and it's a little more difficult to do that virtually. But if you do your research and you're strong in all the other areas that I discussed, you'll be fine. Relax, you'll be fine.
One thing I would add, Carol, we've seen in a lot of our webinars is for the interviewee to be sure to have strong internet connection. As you mentioned, a quiet place, nice neutral background, that's important, but it doesn't matter if you are falling in and out of connectivity. So very strong internet connection is important. We've found out with a lot of people, it's a struggle. So be sure to do that research also. That's a different aspect.
Good point.
Any other questions for Carol? Does anyone have any comments or? things they'd like more clarification on.
Just a quick one, quick question here. Yeah, I've always been told two things about regarding interviews. One is that at the end of each interview, at least you should ask a question. So, which most people do ask this common question, like when should I expect the feedback? So, do you think that you would advise that people just stick to that kind of question, or is there any direction that, like, at least somebody should ask a question? Do you think it is a must that you must ask a question at the end of the interview, or it is not a must? Second question is that you always, I mean, people have always been told that you need to build a rapport before, once you get to the company environment or a compound. So the question is, who are you building this rapport with? Perhaps you've not met the interviewers; they're still locked in a room somewhere. So that has always been confusing part for me. So maybe if you could clarify that.
Lisa or Nicole, could you repeat the questions? The volume was a little low and I couldn't hear.
Sure. The first one Johnson wanted to know is, a typical piece of advice is at the end of the interview, well, the interviewer often says, "Do you have any questions for me?" And one question that an interviewee can ask is, "When might I expect feedback on this process?" And Johnson wants to know, should you be asking that question? Johnson, correct me if I'm wrong. Should you be asking that question every time? And if you do, you really need to have a question at the end of the interview? Does that, not having a question, does that make you seem less invested?
Exactly. You're right.
Okay, I think it is a good idea to have a question. You don't necessarily have to wait to the end of the interview. You could, when somebody's describing the job, have some questions, during the interview. But at the end, if they say, "Do you have any questions?" It's good to have one question about maybe the company, or I was just curious. I read an article in the news lately about this particular challenge, and I was, you could bring in your research. That's a good point at which to bring in your research. Frequently, the interviewer will tell you the process of the job or the applicant selection process. If not, it's okay to ask. You could just say, "Could you please explain to me, the process and when you think you'll be offering this position to an applicant?" It's not inappropriate to, if like in 2 weeks or a week you haven't heard anything, to just contact and say you're just wondering where they are in their process, their hiring process. So I think at the end of the interview, unless you and the interviewer have been talking back and forth and you've been asking lots of questions, if you haven't asked any questions, and when they say, "Do you have any questions?" you say, "No," that's not the greatest. I'd have a couple questions that from your research, and if they've covered everything that you had questions about, it's okay to ask about the process if they haven't told you.
And Johnson, your second question, oh boy.
The second question was about building a rapport. So my question is, who are you supposed to building rapport with, considering the fact that the people that are supposed to interview you, perhaps they are locked in a room somewhere. So are you supposed to build a rapport with the people that also came for the same interview, or like just a little bit confusing to me, that kind of but yeah.
Okay, Lisa, my volume's still low.
Okay, I'll take this on, and then Nicole has a few that she can read from the Q&A. What Johnson is wondering about is a piece of advice he'd always heard is that you should build a rapport for your interview, and he's wondering exactly with whom this rapport is built. Is it with the interviewer, who you may not see until the moment of the interview, or if you're on virtual, it's less direct? Is it with, maybe if you're in a group interview, is it with the other interviewees? And what advice do you have about that idea of trying to make a connection or a rapport?
Okay. I think you build a rapport with everybody you come in contact with, even like the secretary, if you're sitting in a waiting room or something, waiting to be called in. You know, everywhere along the line, try to build a rapport. Look people in the eye. Your research will give you some questions to ask. You know, the interviewer is definitely important, because the interviewer, if they're not the actual person making the decision, they're going to be part of the decision-making team. So you definitely want to build some type of rapport with that person. And usually the interviewer, sort of when you go to like interview school, I mean, interviewer school, there is no such thing, but as an interviewer, you try not to let on how you feel about the interviewee. They shouldn't walk out of there saying, boy, I got that job. You know, as the applicant, you should walk out of there saying, boy, I'm not really sure if they like me or not. The interviewer should try to remain neutral. You know, they shouldn't say like, well, when you get this job, this is what you'll be doing, when we fill this position, that person will be doing this. So the interviewer shouldn't really show their cards as to how they feel about you. So don't let that throw you off. Just continue trying to impress them with your knowledge, your motivation, your creativity, your sincerity, and, you know, firm handshake, look them in the eye, and try, you know, if you do research and you know who you're going to be interviewed with, try to find some common connection. You know, oh, my sister went to the same school that you went to, or, you know, I also like to do X, Y, Z. You know, so you want to build a connection.
Very good. So, Carol, we're going to take a few more questions because we are approaching 45 minutes. And just to our attendees, we're very conscious of the time that you're dedicating to this course and to join us each week. So it will always be our intention to keep this under an hour. And so, Carol, a few more quick questions for you. We have one question that is cracking a joke in an interview allowed in the interview room? What's your opinion on this?
I think humor can be a very effective tool at reducing tension and stress. If it's sort of clever humor, I mean, it might be a little bit of a risk if the person that's interviewing you is very serious and very staid and looks like they might not have a sense of humor. It might be a gamble. They also might not think it's funny. So you have to be a little careful. If you tend to be kind of, you know, often say things that are funny or sarcastic, if you're good at it, sure, go for it. But it can be a little risky. So I would avoid it unless there is just, you know, they set you up for a great one-liner. But it can be a way to build a rapport, but it's a little riskier.
And this may also have some dependency on cultures, different cultures too, right?
Yes, definitely. Yes, good point.
Okay, we have Clarisse from Rwanda. She just wants to say thank you, Carol. It was a very nice presentation, and I'm happy to see all panelists.
Thank you.
We have Another graduate scholar from Rwanda, Alexis. He wants to also express his special thanks to Mama Carol.
Ah,
And
Alexis.
his question is referring to your amazing Mama Carol. What do you think makes a lot of people receive a low score or fail the interview despite having done enough research and preparation? So what are some reasons why someone may not be selected for the job?
Well, if it's obvious that they didn't do the research, uh, that's a strike against them. Sometimes people can do the research, but don't adequately display it or make it evident that they did research. Also, just kind of very flat emotions, like you don't smile, you don't look them in the eye. You just, there's no connection, there's no, the interviewer gets the impression they don't really want to work here. Well, why are you even here? And they have no questions, they're not curious about anything. Realize you're not the only person being interviewed, so you are competing with some other applicants who have done research and might be more relaxed. The more research you do, the more relaxed you should feel. So that helps, that comes across, because the interviewer is saying, how will this person fit into our company? Do I want to work with this person every day? So sometimes just letting your personality out and relaxing will help. But usually it's because the person either they don't have the skills, they're not qualified for the interview and they should never have applied, or they're just like a blob. They're just boring. You know, they don't smile, they don't do anything. So if you have the skills and you're qualified, do the research, build rapport with the interviewer, then you got a pretty good shot.
Great. And what maybe, as Nicole said, we want to be mindful of time, so this may be our last question, but it's a very good one from Sujan. I'll say the last sentence explains what he's asking. He says he's asking this question because interviewers might have particular sets of questions designed for the interview. So how do you share details of your experiences and show that you're made for the job? How do you lead to the conversation with the interviewer that you can share details, especially if they have specific questions they ask?
Well, that hopefully you might have incorporated that in your cover letter, so they have that information. That interviewer, if they're a good interviewer, they'll pull that out of your cover letter and ask you something about it. Or you can pretend you're a politician, and when they ask you one question, start to answer it and then twist it to get in what you want to say. I don't know if they do that everywhere.